Now, of course, we're at this part of the podcast where we're going to be doing our tips for round 12. This is the first round of the second buys, I guess, now, isn't it? We're into round 12 now. We've got a couple of teams having the bye this week. It is the Lions, North Melbourne, the Sydney Swans, and the Giants with the bye this week. My tips for this week are Port Adelaide over Carlton on Thursday night. Friday night, I've gone Collingwood over the Western Bulldogs. On Saturday, I've gone the Crows over Hawthorn, the West Coast Eagles over St Kilda, and Geelong over Richmond. And on Sunday, I've gone Fremantle over Melbourne and the Gold Coast Suns over Essendon. So my brother, obviously, is not here, but he has given me his tips as well. He has gone Carlton over Port Adelaide, Collingwood over the Western Bulldogs, Adelaide over Hawthorn, West Coast over the St Kilda, Geelong over Richmond, Melbourne over Fremantle, and the Gold Coast Suns over Essendon. So a couple of big games this week. So we'll start on Thursday night, Port Adelaide and Carlton. Now, I've got the reasoning for why he's done these tips, my brother, so I'll just go through why I've gone for certain teams. I've gone for Port Adelaide because I think they had a pretty easy week last week, so I don't think the 5-day break really hampers Port Adelaide too much. I think it hampers Carlton a little bit more. And Carlton still have a terrible record at Adelaide Oval. They have only won one game, I believe, at Adelaide Oval, and that was against Fremantle and Gather Round. And we know how close they were to losing that game. So I think that that's something that's concern for Carlton. Another thing for Port Adelaide is I think that they're starting to get some consistency through their midfield. I think the likes of Ollie Wines, Jason Horne-Francis going through there. Rosie was kind of eased back into it last week, and Zach Butters. I think that's the key for Port Adelaide that will go through there. And I think the likes of Will and Drew going through as well is something that will help them. I also do have a big concern over Carlton's forward line at the moment. I think they broke away from Gold Coast last week, but they still weren't able to do it until the last quarter, and they dominated the Gold Coast for a lot of that game. So that's just a little bit of a concern on the Carlton front. I do think that is somewhere where Carlton can get on top of Port Adelaide, because I think Port Adelaide do struggle with the big key forward. The main reason why I'm going for Port Adelaide here is the fact that Carlton have a pretty terrible record at Adelaide Oval, and because both teams are coming off a 5-day break, I think that Port Adelaide, because they played North Melbourne last week and kind of pretty much walked over them in the end, I think that's going to affect Port Adelaide a lot less than Carlton. That's kind of where I'm going for on that game. Friday night is Collingwood up against the Western Bulldogs. This isn't Marvel, so even though it's a Collingwood home game, it is technically a Western Bulldogs home game. So this does set up for a pretty interesting contest. And the Bulldogs last week were very good against the Swans, and arguably could have beaten them if it wasn't for the injuries throughout the game. I do think that Collingwood are going to win this game, because last week, they should have beaten Fremantle. And if it wasn't for I don't know if it was just a free kick, but for 3 quarters, basically, they had this game won, Collingwood, and they cost it in the last 10 minutes. They threw it. They're not going to let that happen again. I think Collingwood, they've hit that form now. They haven't lost in their last 6 or 7 games, I think. And I think they're hitting their form now. So I think it's going to be hard to tip against Collingwood for the rest of the year. I know they've had 2 draws, but I think that they'll bounce back after a pretty poor last 15 minutes. I don't think they'll accept that sort of ending to the game, and I think they'll bounce back and win this one pretty comfortably in the end. I will talk about the last 2 games on Sunday. First one is Melbourne and Fremantle. This is an interesting one because this is in Darwin, and it's 12:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday. So the reason why I have gone Fremantle is because the weather, for one thing. I think the Melbourne, they're starting to get pretty cold in Victoria, so I don't think they're going to be accustomed to this temperature. And I think we saw Geelong a couple of weeks ago. They couldn't deal with the conditions. Now, Perth is not exactly warm at the moment, but I do think that the Fremantle players would be more accustomed to the temperature up in Darwin. So I think that's something where Fremantle can get this game won. And also, I think that Fremantle want to respond after last week. They were poor for 3 quarters against Collingwood, like I mentioned a minute ago, and I think they're going to want to respond from this. And the fact is that Melbourne, yes, they scored 100 points against St Kilda. Well, they scored high against St Kilda, but it's St Kilda. Whoop-de-doo. They have struggled to score a lot of the times this year, Melbourne, and Fremantle's defence, I think, is going to hold up pretty strong here. I think Fremantle can get a pretty good score. I think their smalls can get to work. I think it's going to be a little bit different for their tall, because their defenders last week for Melbourne were able to, portray the backline all day. And I don't think they'll have that luxury in Darwin because it'll be a lot more warmer, humid. It's not going to be easy to just intercept a mark all day. So I think if Fremantle can get the ball to ground, Tracy's really good at bringing the ball to ground. I think that's where Fremantle can get this game won. And I think their smalls can get to work and win this game. Now, the final game is a very interesting contest on Sunday. It's the Gold Coast up against Essendon. Now, on the AFL tipping app, it's very interesting because they've given the Gold Coast the favourites here. And The reason why I'm going the Gold Coast is, yes, one, it is at home. They haven't lost there this season. So they do have a very good record. But this is a test for Essendon, I think. I think that we're at the mid-season point now. Essendon kind of fell off at this point last year. They were in 5th spot, I think, by around 15 last year, and they fell straight off the face of the earth. They're in 2nd spot right now. They have to continue their form. I think this is probably 50-50, if I'm being honest. The main reason, though, I'm going the Gold Coast is because it's in the Gold Coast. If this was at Marvel Stadium, I'd be going Essendon all day. I may even stream this game, because I think this is going to be a really good contest. I am going to definitely stream the Friday game, guys, Collingwood v the Bulldogs. But I'll definitely consider doing the Gold Coast Essendon game on Sunday as well. So before we move into the AFL Fantasy Chat, guys, let's quickly take a look at the league for the channel. So the tipping league for the channel, of course. This obviously started at the start of the year, so it's quite small. But at the moment, still Brandon leads on top with 70 tips. He is 1 tip in front of Paul, who actually got the highest this week with 8 tips. So congratulations to him. He only missed the one. I'll quickly take a look to see which one he missed. Everyone got the draw. I was so pissed off about that because I tipped Collingwood and a lot of people tipped Freo, so I was really disappointed that I didn't get that tip. But anyway, guess I lost that one. He tipped, Paul did tip Hawthorn, so good job on him for picking that one. Because I don't think anyone would have. He missed the Geelong game, so that's unfortunate. Not going to get the full 9. It was pretty close to getting it, but yeah, unfortunately missed that one. I moved into, I'm in 4th. I actually went down this week, but that's just because my total margin was beaten by Brett. Brett was able to just jump me on that. We both actually have the exact same margin, but I guess because he missed the margin on the Swans game on Thursday night by 1, so he was pretty close to getting it. I don't actually think you get a bonus for anything for that, but I guess it's like a little percentage anyway. My brother is sitting in 8th spot. I think he's actually climbed the last few weeks, so he's done a pretty good job. And the lowest this week went to Johnny, the Fevolutionized, I think that's what it is. He got 5. Dude, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be mean, Johnny, but how did you get 5 this week? This was such an easy one to do. I have to look to see what you tipped, man, because that's pretty terrible from you. He tipped the Dogs against Sydney. Look, that's I could understand that, thinking that Sydney were kind of due for a loss. I get that one. Why did you tip North Melbourne over Port Adelaide? North aren't winning a game this year. You can't, look, even if they do win a game this year, you can't tip them. You can't predict them winning a game. You tipped Geelong, that's fair enough. You tipped Brisbane, again, fair enough. And, okay, you didn't... I thought you tipped West Coast as well. Someone else tipped West Coast. How the hell do you do that, dude? They're not going to win against the Crows in Adelaide. Anyway, so Johnny missed a couple this week. I'm sorry, man, but there's a couple there. I mean, I'll give you the Bulldogs, but you can't pick North. I'm sorry. That's not good enough. I'm very disappointed in you. You need to leave me a note on Monday with an apology, because that was terrible. Anyway, I'm sorry, but fuck, that's bad. Anyway, and still on bottom is Daniel. So Daniel has been on bottom for quite a while now, but at the moment, he's equal bottom. So he's not that bad. There's also Kirk, who is Brighton 75. He's also on bottom with 62. Lana also coming back to 63, and Johnny, actually, because of all this, my brother was able to jump a few tips. So I do appreciate you guys helping him out. I know he does feel a bit sad. He comes to me every single week after the podcast and says, look, can you just tell them to start losing some tips so I can just start getting in front? Maybe that's why Johnny actually tipped North Melbourne to try and get my brother up a few tips. So I do appreciate that, Johnny, actually. I take it all back. Thank you for that, because he is my younger brother, so sometimes I do need to protect him, and I do appreciate you dropping a couple of tips for him. Anyway, that's kind of all the AFL tips for this week, guys.